You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast from Chicago. We are live here at the podcast stage at Celebration 2019. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 274, The Wisdom of Star Wars. And joining with me, as always, he is the Ray to my low. He is Blowfish 1, Blowfish 2. He is the Pablo to my Hidalgo. Welcome, Jonesy, to the show. Jonesy.
You know, I hope at your funeral I get to write the foreword and the eulogy because I'm going to come up with something totally epic that no one else is going to come up with.
It's probably deserved.
I'll finally have a response after all these years.
Yeah. And this stranger over to my left here, I probably should introduce him. This is Mike Rondo. So for those of you who've been following the show for some time, you know that Mike was the former host and producer, and now he's the roadie. So we
I get abused.
Get him to set up everything. So, but thank you guys for being here. I'm going to channel Southwest Airlines and say that we know you got a lot of options, and we're glad that you're joining with us today here at Star Wars Celebration. So it's great. So how many of you actually listened to the show, or how many of you are just here because you needed a break and needed to get off your feet? Great. Yeah. Thanks. So for those of you that don't know, the Cantina Cast is a show where we try to break down scenes, quotes, analysis, try to get in the heads of characters, do some psychology if we can. And of course, as Mike says, all your favorite characters is what we do. So today, again, we're doing Wisdom of Star Wars. We're going to talk about three themes. We'd like to touch on failure, good and evil, and letting go. And what we thought we'd do is take some quotes that kind of reinforce those themes, talk about the quotes, talk about some examples where we saw that wisdom play out either for or against what the expected outcome of that wisdom should have been, or maybe just reinforce the quotes with some examples where we think that helped to play out. So the first one up is failure.
Yeah, why don't we get started with failure? So this seems appropriate now that we've seen Rise of the Skywalker's trailer, which of course was pretty amazing, right? So now that they're extinct, the Jedi are romanticized, deified. But if you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure. But what I thought would be a little different is we've talked a lot about the failure of the Jedi. I think we've beaten that horse pretty well to death, right? I thought we'd turn around and look at the failure of the Sith and of Palpatine. The ideas of him being able to, this over-exuberance, overconfidence of being able to turn Luke and orchestrate an entire empire and just global domination or galaxy-wide domination. And I thought it would be just a great idea to go ahead and say, what do we have to do about that?
Yeah. I mean, and the quote itself is, the quote that we want to work from is, and now that they're extinct, the Jedi are romanticized, deified, sorry. But if you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure. We were talking about this last night, and one of the interesting things is even though, right or wrong, with the Emperor, he, as overconfident as he was, and Luke calls him out in it, right? Says your overconfidence is your weakness. He had a backup plan. Right. How many of you guys have played Battlefront 2 or are familiar with Operation Cinder, right? So even though he was kind of leading that and leading the Empire, he had a contingency plan in place. And that's where I think the Jedi really kind of shined in terms of their failure. They really didn't have a contingency plan in place at all.
Right. They had Plan A, and Plan A was basically it. But clearly, and we saw this in the Aftermath books as well, we saw where he had a contingency plan with Rax. And he had a full stream because he expected... This is one of the things I think we've seen with the Jedi, to bring the Jedi into it, their inability to see past themselves and to be able to get an idea of what comes next. They just expected this long, continuous existence of the way things are today. Whereas Palpatine in particular had an idea that there were things that could fall apart at any moment. And he started planning for those exceptions to the rule. And I think that's the major difference that we've seen, where the Sith prepared for this, even though we've seen numerous examples of where they don't expect to. I think Momin was a good example of that in the comic books. But Palpatine really expected. I think that's the cool thing about the trailer now, is that we start to see the fruits of that labor. And how does that fit into the entire story?
Yeah. Also, I guess with failure around Palpatine, it was Luke. You could argue that was one of his biggest failures, and being unable to turn him. He was so convinced that was going to happen. He had already foreseen it. which kind of played into why he failed, right? That was a huge one for him. And you had this interesting take on whether or not the cosmic force is a metaphor for failure.
Right, yeah. So last year we talked about the living and the cosmic force, and the idea of failure seems like it's a part of the circle of life. We all want to pass on what we've known to our kids, and hopefully they can make better decisions or different decisions. And working that into what it means to have life and then death and then rebirth and renewal, like we saw in Last Jedi in particular, and have our children and the generations that come after us be able to make different decisions, and to be able to learn from that is, I think, exceptionally important in the overall saga in particular. But the cosmic force in particular, what we learned with Qui-Gon is that it all feeds one another. And so if we are going to feed it, then we have to feed it everything that we know. And that was part of what Luke didn't seem to learn until the last moment of Last Jedi, is that you have to be able to pass on these things. Otherwise, there's no opportunity in the future for anyone else that you're involved with to make better decisions.
Yeah. Let's talk about good and evil. So this one, honestly, we could probably spend a whole lot of time here, but let's start with the quote. And the quote is from Revenge of the Sith. It's Palpatine's quote: "The Sith and Jedi are similar in almost every way, including their quest for greater power." And now, before we get into the quote, in the original trilogy, the lines seem very defined, right? It was the light side and the dark side. We learned about the Empire. We learned about the Rebels. We learned about Vader. We learned about Kenobi. It was very black and white. And there was really the concept of anything being gray at that time was unheard of. Again, very defined lines back then. And over time, especially with the prequel trilogies, now with the sequel trilogies, if you look at the books, the comics, some of the other content that's come out, those lines, that gap between what is good and what's evil has really shortened, right? Those lines have become much more blurred with the additional content that we've been getting from other medias. And I think back to growing up as a kid, right? The original trilogy for me was very black and white. And in my own personal experiences, through the hardships of going through life and life happening to me in reverse, I can see where those lines can blur, right? It was almost like the trilogy grew up like with me, right? In that regard. So yeah, that kind of shrunk.
Yeah, and you get this idea of these purist type of ideals of where we want to be able to show everyone that this is what's right and this is what's wrong. And the original trilogy really did a fantastic job of that. But as we started to get further along, especially get into the prequels, of the behaviors of one another and how do they, are they always altruistic? And I don't think that we start to see that. We start to doubt whether we can trust the beliefs of those that are supposed to help us along that path.
Yeah. I just think about rose-tinted glasses, growing up, looking at life in that way. And our perspectives change over time. So one example that I want to throw out there, and as far as where I felt like the lines were kind of blurred, and we're going to pick on Mace Windu because we pick on Mace Windu quite a bit on the show. But there are some things about him. Now, you could argue that Mace Windu, at his core, he was a good person. I truly believe that, right? But just his fighting style, right? So if you're familiar with Vapid, the fighting style that he's got, one of the things about that fighting style is you actually give in to the dark side, you give in to the light side, and you figure out how to balance both of those. I always remember the quote from Yoda saying that once you start down the dark side, forever will it dominate your destiny. To Mace's credit, he was able to kind of balance that. I still think, though, at some point it got to him. And what I'm referring to is the scene in Revenge of the Sith, where he's got Palpatine laying on the ground. Palpatine's got him in check with the Force lightning. He's got his lightsaber out, and Anakin walks in, and Mace tells him, "We got to kill this guy." In fact, he says he's too powerful, right? And even Anakin, as naive as he is still in the Force, as immature as he is with the Force, can sense that there is a right and a wrong here. But I do feel like to some extent, Mace has been tainted a little bit by power, because I'm going to go back to the fighting style. The Vapid fighting style is really about trying to win. That is its sole purpose, right? It's a one-trick pony type thing. It's not about balance. It's not about defense. It is purely about taking over your opponent. And so to do that, you do have to channel power. If you look at the set of the Code of the Sith, there's, I think, 2 verses in there that talk about power, right? We know that is an important element of the Sith. And so for him, in order to channel that, I think to some extent, I think he is trying to become more powerful, or at least eliminate anything that is more powerful there.
Right. But what would his angle have been? I don't see where Windu would have. He didn't have anything to gain except maintain what they had and the belief system that they had. I think with Anakin, it was still very selfish in nature, right? He had to save Palpatine in order to grow his own power. And without that power, he had no ability to save Padme or to be able to, and still retroactively try to save his mother in that regard. But I don't understand what I've always struggled was, what did Windu have to do except to retain what they already had?
I guess an example where things are a little bit more clearly drawn, lines are clearly drawn. Palpatine, I think we can all agree, is pretty evil and probably the embodiment of selfishness. No offense to you, by the way, sir. But yeah, I mean, he's all about power. He's all about unlimited power. I mean, he's quoted that in there. But if you think about it, his path to his power has been just tainted with all kinds of murder, deception, manipulation. You can look at, him murdering his master. We know that from the Plagueis novel. He manipulated Dooku. He manipulated Padme, Anakin, Maul, Ezra. I mean, the Senate. I mean, you go on and on about how much manipulation this guy had behind him, and it was all in a way to get power. There's nothing good about this guy. There's nothing blurred. The line is very drawn and cleanly drawn with him. The inverse of that, for me, you could argue Leia, but we're kind of focusing on Jedi, so Leia is my first thought. But Rey seems to be the next one, right? She's very selfless. I mean, everything that she does comes from a very pure, good, honest, kind of sincere place. And in that regard, I think she's very similar to Leia as well, because Leia is probably the embodiment of selflessness. But if you think about The Force Awakens, she was in there. She was in that fight to save Finn, to save her friend, right? As simple and as innocent as that sounds, that was really what she was trying to do. In fact, they're in the midst of the on Starkiller Base, and what does she do when she sees Finn? She goes and hugs him, like takes the time to give him a hug, right? I mean, it's like when I think about my daughter, that's exactly what she would do, right? But she definitely is the embodiment, I guess, of selflessness there. In The Last Jedi, all she wanted to do was save the galaxy. Really had no time had passed. She had just taken on this mantle of being the savior of the galaxy. And when she went out to go find Luke Skywalker, and Luke basically shunned her away, turned her away, said he wasn't going to engage, she still said, okay, fine, I'm going to do this without you. I mean, again, another act of pure selflessness that she didn't have to take on.
Right. And I think we see an extent of that with Luke in Empire as well. So he didn't have, well, we could say that he was maybe being a bit selfish of saving his friends. But I think at the end of the day, he was willing to sacrifice himself in order to prevent the pain that he was doing, which was very much unlike Anakin, where Anakin wanted to sacrifice everything around him for himself. But Luke he would be more than willing to sacrifice himself. And I think we see that with Rey as well. I think Rey would do very much the same type of thing, where she would be more than happy to step in, do what's necessary. And if it meant giving her life for Finn or for Poe or someone else, she would more than gladly do that.
There are also some other examples too that I wanted to just touch on briefly, where I felt like there was a preemptive move or an action that was taken to stop those lines from blurring. And have you guys read we covered it, but have you all read the Qui-Gon Jinn Age of Republic comic? So it's really good. Highly recommend it. But there's a really great scene there early on where both Qui-Gon and Yoda are kind of sitting there. They're talking. They're on Coruscant. And Qui-Gon's really uncomfortable. He's uncomfortable with the fact that the Jedi temple is sitting there smack dab in the middle of the capital city. They're being used as weapons. And he tells Yoda as much. He says, we're being used as weapons and people see us as weapons. And that's unsettling for him, right? Because we know what Qui-Gon's about.
Well, more importantly, the Jedi, he views that the Jedi might view themselves as okay to be the defenders and be the warriors of the galaxy as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he even clearly says that. He says, I think we're starting to kind of get that mindset, and that's not right. In fact, I think his exact line is, he says, we've lost our vision at that point. And him and Yoda kind of go back and forth. But I think that was where Qui-Gon could see that those lines were starting to blur, and was trying to preemptively get in front of that to say, hey, someone speak up and say someone needs to stop this, because we're going down a path that's not in alignment with what our true core beliefs are. there. The other one is one of our favorites is just Luke rejecting the dark side in Return of the Jedi. There's been a lot of arguments that have been made that Luke was able to overcome Vader by channeling the dark side. You could argue that those lines became blurred at that moment, but he still had it in him to kind of shun that, turn it away, and say, "No, I'm not going to do this."
Yeah, and this is the maturity that we're always looking for in our characters as the story starts to evolve. Are they able to make a different decision than what they make throughout a scene or throughout a series? Can they do something different? Can they recognize as they start to make decisions that those are the wrong things? And Luke is overcome by the thirst for power, the domination, or the anger, or whatever was coming out of him. But his ability to stop, look, and feel for a moment. And I think this goes back to some of Qui-Gon's teachings of Anakin, far back as Phantom Menace, of being able to really stay true to who you are rather than letting go of that and sacrificing that part of you in order to do what's right and what is really beyond yourself. If Luke goes to the dark side, then everything's over. We're at endgame then, right? But he can't do that. And he was able to stop and say no and reject it. And I think that's one of the few times we've seen characters actually stop themselves and recognize that the path I'm going is not the right path. And we have to make a different choice in order to make a better day next time.
One of the other things that we want to touch on was, so we're going to channel the comic again. So this is the Vader comic, the more recent publication. We've talked about a character named Momin. Have you got any Momin fans out there? Or is it just me and him? It's probably just
Tuan in the back.
Probably just us. Yeah. All right, Tuan, thanks, Tuan. So Momin is a character that came up in the Vader comic. He's got it. We won't get into, this won't be a character dissection of sorts, but he's very interesting because he's almost like the anti Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn believes in allowing the Force to kind of guide his will, right? We saw that in the comic book, where he decides he's just going to, in the same comic that I'm referring to in Age of Republic, he decides he's going to jump in a ship and allow the Force to kind of take him wherever he needs to go to kind of help sort things out in his head and show him the answers that he's seeking. Momin is very different. He grows up. We get the sense that he was a Sith of some type. Yeah, fair.
Yeah, I think at one point, right?
Okay, but he diverts from the normal Sith path, and what I mean by that is the Sith are so about controlling the dark side of the Force, whereas Momin, like Qui-Gon Jinn, feels that it's his duty to be a servant of the dark side of the Force. He allows the dark side Force to kind of lead his actions and feels like he's subservient to that, right? Where traditionally Sith, like the Emperor, Dooku, Maul, they're all about trying to control the dark side of the Force. But it's very different, I guess, than that. And
well, he's using his power rather than abusing it or trying to accumulate. It's a really sick way of being pure in the dark side, of wanting to serve that side of the Force and to come up with something. Now, I think he did have some personal issues with some of this. He wanted to create crazy. Well, yeah, he wanted to create art of all things out of mass murder, right? So, yeah. But it was all in service to something else. So it's very much the antithesis of what the Jedi had, of where the pure of the Jedi, like Qui-Gon, where it was in service to the Force for the light side of the Force. His was purely to the darkness, and being able to, he was willing to sacrifice anything and everything except himself. I guess that's the one thing he stopped short with. He wasn't willing to sacrifice himself because he had to be the one to create the grand masterpiece, which is a little bit aligned with what we saw with Palpatine. But his ability to grow this power and to basically create, Sith love their super weapons, right? So of course we're going to make another super weapon. But in order to do that, and basically freeze everyone in time so that the pain and the suffering that you feel in that moment is captured for a lifetime in service to the Force, which will eternally feed the dark side of the Force, which was kind of a crazy concept because we've not really heard it in a continuous form. Usually it's a singular action that says, let's do this one event and it serves the Force in this way. And then we move to the next series of events. Yeah. This was presumably for a lifetime. Now, he wasn't going to go retire after this. I don't get that impression.
You never know.
You never know, right? But so what was the next big thing as well? But it was an interesting dichotomy of accumulating power in service of the Force, but not in a way that we've ever seen before.
Right.
And I thought that's why this story arc in the Vader comic was so good, of what other ways can we interpret the Force that we don't do today? Because we tend to look at things through the lens of the Jedi for the most part, because that's what I think most of us probably want to more align with spiritually.
Yeah. I think George was trying to guide us there initially too.
I think so too. Well, yeah. George always wanted us to make the right decision. Star Wars is about right and wrong, good and evil.
Yeah.
So how do you come to the right decision?
And the last one we have is letting go. The quote is, train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
Yeah. So yeah, Yoda said this, of course, to Anakin in one of the pivotal moments of Revenge of the Sith. And what was really interesting is we started to look through the rest of canon for this type of quote is really a little bit of a difference between Ezra and Anakin. When Ezra was confronted with some of these choices in World Between Worlds and Rebels, he made a choice at first to go ahead and save Ahsoka, but then he had to stop, and wanting to save Kanan had to make a different choice. He finally had, kind of like Luke did in Jedi, he had to finally recognize that if I make this decision, it's more than what is going to impact me. It's going to impact really his family and to an extent the galaxy at large of what was about to happen. So when he made that choice, it felt like a very key turning point, and we start to see a character kind of take this journey of letting go finally, something that we've heard so much about through the movies in particular. But now we finally have an example of a character able to do that. And then, of course, we get more of that as the series finishes with his parents. This is what Ezra's life has been towards. And this is very much like Anakin, where you've had a family, you knew what they were. Who you are was a bit thrust upon you. You didn't have much of a choice to go into this world. You were kind of sucked into it, and you start to learn. And we talked about accumulating power. We saw the eagerness of Ezra at times to go ahead and, why I have this power, why can't I use it? Why can't I do these things? If we can, we should, and be more action oriented rather than a blend of this pensive versus action oriented thing like we had with Anakin.
Yeah, he at one point he was toying, and several times he was toying with this idea of actually teaming up with Maul, trying to learn what he could. I mean, his heart was in the right place. We understand what he was trying to do, and we understood what Maul was trying to do, trying to manipulate him. Yeah, he was doing it for, I guess, the better there of it all.
Right, and that's the thing with power and the inability to let go, is that you have this very dangerous moment of where you are susceptible to corruption, when the things are not in your favor, and you know if you just take this next step, if I just take this one small step, I can still step back. But with the dark side, we know that that's just not possible, or we know it's very difficult. Right? Maybe we can argue that it has happened before, but it's very, very difficult in order to do that and make that step back. And while Ezra, I think, certainly flirted with it a handful of times.
Yeah.
When he was confronted with the single thing that he wanted most, he started to realize that, my family is the crew of the Ghost. It's not the family that I've lost. And he found that through building others around him and the love and the camaraderie and everything that they built around that team, that we could call it a replacement if we'd like, but it was something that there's nothing that replaces your bloodlines. And I think we started to see where the characters were able to evolve something beyond bloodlines. And really one of the first times we had seen that, because everything in Star Wars had really continued to come back towards blood.
Yeah. And that storyline, do we have Rebels fans? Yeah. All right. So good. That's a great show. Ezra's journey, and we've talked about this in the show, that was really hard for us at times. Like, we really were pulling for this guy the entire time, and it just never felt like he was able to get over the hump in terms of character development. I mean, he had moments, don't get me wrong. I don't want to take anything away from the writers and some of the stuff they were hitting on, but it really wasn't until that scene for me, that, and then obviously the finale, that I felt like he finally got over the hump, that we got the character that he matured and grown up before our eyes over the course of the last 4 years. And that was a really hard decision for him. It's very similar in some tone to what we see with Rey in her adoption of a family. She's coming from no family. She's now made Pin. What did I call him yesterday? Foe and Pin? Yeah. Poe and Finn, she's made those her family members. She's kind of going through that same kind of thing. So I'd be interesting to see if she's going to be at a point where she is going to have to let go as well. I was trying to work in, He's going to hate me for this.
Yeah.
I was trying to work in the letting go comment, quote from Kenobi in episode 4. Like, how do I tie this back to this topic? And I couldn't do it. So, but the analogy I had was, even then, to me, it feels like there was a message in that. So imagine you got Luke Skywalker. He's down in the trench, and he is like laser focused, no pun intended, laser focused on trying to blow up the Death Star. He's learning he's leaning against his experience as a pilot. He has his targeting computer. He's got his buddies. He's in formation, right? All this is very scripted in terms of what he should do. And the one voice that comes over to him, the one turning point for him, is when he hears Kenobi say, "Let go." And it's in that moment that he was able to channel something else, channel the Force, channel his feelings. And that's what he needed in order to win. And I think the analogy that I was trying to draw with Ezra letting go and Ahsoka letting go, for Ahsoka, her targeting computer, if you will, if you just stick with this analogy here, her targeting computer really is the Jedi Code in the Jedi Temple, right? That is the prescribed method in which, or the prescription for her in terms of how she should be, who she should be. And she made a conscious decision to turn that off and walk away altogether, given what had, obviously had happened to her. With Ezra, he started from the very beginning, from the pilot episode. We know he was looking for his family, right? That was the one thing he was going for. That was his target. That was his targeting computer. When we get to the episode where he finally decides to turn away, because Palpatine threw that out there and said, "This is yours. You can take it. All you got to do is walk through that door." He decided to turn off his targeting computer. He shut that off, went back. And in all three of those instances, I think it really did allow all of those characters to, develop in the ways that I think we were really hoping for at that point.
Right. And it goes to show you that whatever you grow up with, the family environment that you have pictured in your head doesn't have to be the one that you end up with. And you have key points with it. I mean, even Anakin, right? They had similar use with Ezra, but we don't necessarily they don't have the same bond with it. But Anakin consistently wanted to replicate or to create the family that he always thought he missed. Yeah. Whereas even though Ezra had it, he was somehow able to build it in a different way and open himself up to be able to build it a different way.
And Anakin was he's the almost absolute opposite of letting go. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. An ability to. I think it was something he couldn't do, but at the end of the day, it really becomes he wouldn't do it. He just wouldn't make the difficult choice because he wasn't willing to sacrifice something that he consistently thought he was already sacrificing over and over with his life, with his family, with the decisions he was having to make, and constantly felt like his family environment wasn't building the support that he needed, very much in contrast with Ezra, who had the Ghost crew. The Jedi weren't doing that for him. There was a need that was not fulfilled, and there was no ability for them to, because they were turning that light switch off for themselves as well. There was no way the Jedi could do it because they've just deprived themselves of certain things for so long. And even when we see things like Obi-Wan with Satine, right? So we know there's moments where they're all, we maybe use the word tempted, but have the opportunity to fulfill something beyond what they've been trained for and prepared for. At the end of the day, they have to go back to the one family that they understand, even if it's lacking in very many ways.
Yeah. We can talk about Kylo. We were having this discussion last night about whether or not Kylo fits this as well, and whether or not he's actually able to let go of anything. I think the jury's still out on him. We will probably know a lot more, obviously, in the next movie. But for Kylo, it feels like he is holding on to a lot of things, whether that's what he went through with his father, some of the mental type abuse that he's been taking from Snoke over the years. There is, we still don't understand the whole, I'm going to finish what you started. I mean, He's still holding on to that. He's not letting go of whatever that is.
Everything's boiled on the surface with Kylo, and it's all just simmering all the time, which of course is very much like Anakin as well. But Rey's treatment of him, and maybe some of the things we saw in the teaser might be a little bit misleading, but if there really is a conflict between the two of them, it's just another example of where he's unable to move past certain events in his life that were either challenging or they were, inconvenient even sometimes, I think, for him. But yeah, the inability to let go of really anything with Han, because we really don't hear him talk too much about his mother. So it seems natural to gravitate that most of his issues were with Han. But his inability to move past any of that is coloring his future and his present more so than anything else that he comes across. And until he's able to finally break from that, and even Rey with all of her more pure motives and what she wants him to be more, or what she can see, what she wants him to become, he still just doesn't want to. It's his vision. And this is kind of goes back to the quest for power. If his vision is the one that must be fulfilled, because he feels like he has had no opportunity to fulfill what he thinks his life should be and what the galaxy should look like as a whole. And until he is able to achieve that, he won't find peace. The funny part is he will never find peace like that.
Yeah. And yet we still get the moment in The Last Jedi where he tells Rey to let go, right? I mean, he's basically trying to let go of all of...
Oh, yeah. The hypocrisy comes into
play. The
play,
hypocrisy plays in there as well. So, I mean, that to me is just a form of manipulation, trying to maybe tell Rey what he thinks she needs to hear in that moment. So I don't know that it was sincere. You can make an argument one way or the other. I think we've done it on the show a number of times about whether there was good intentions there or not, or was that just part of his manipulation, part of his larger plan?
Well, I think it also goes to he needs to form an attachment with something, because he's clearly missing something to ground him.
Yeah.
So as much as he wants to fulfill his view of things, he does not want to do it by himself. And until he can be comfortable, I think that's part of letting go. Part of letting go is being comfortable with who you are and being able to say, these are all the things going on around me, but this is what I believe in, and this is what I want to do. This is what I need to do, but not in a self-destructing galaxy domination kind of way, maybe.
Do you think Luke then was right in letting go? I mean, I'm trying to think when he decided to go back and save his friends, even though he was told not to, right? Was that the right decision?
I think we have a lot of examples of why it wasn't the right decision, but I think from the selflessness aspect, it was not a bad decision. I think his intentions were pure. His intentions of what he wanted to do. I don't think he wanted to, there may have been a part of him that was still very eager and very ambitious to prove his worth and prove his training. And I think we saw that when he is introduced with Yoda, that I've learned so much. And but Yoda had driven some of that from him, some of the youthful brashness as well. But something else, though, that came to mind was more along the lines of course, now I forgot what I was thinking about, but yeah.
We'll hold that thought.
Yeah.
And we've got, what we got time here for?
Yeah, another 10 minutes. Yeah.
10 minutes. So we've got time if you guys want to ask questions of us. Either it can be about Star Wars, it can be about the show, it could be about 80s pop culture.
No.
So if you got any questions, we got a few minutes to answer. We'd love to hear from you.
Nobody
has a question.
No.
Yes, sir.
I didn't listen to you guys' podcast about the teaser breakdown. I was thinking about this where you're talking the whole, you think there's spitting some seeds in it. I have a theory that Rey is actually jumping on to Kylo's silence over.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Right. So the question was, or the statement was, it might be Rey is jumping on top of the silencer rather than over it.
So before we go further, have you guys listened to our breakdown so far of the teaser? Half of it? Okay. So we'll probably spoil some things in the show. What we talked about on that, so we theorized that maybe there would be a team up of sorts. I think I would love to see that personally. I don't know how they get there, but it just seems weird, one, that she would turn away from the TIE fighter first, right? Why wouldn't she just take it on straight on? It seems a lot of flash to do that. You could still make the same argument that she wouldn't turn away, or that she would face it to jump onto it, but whatever. But yeah, I mean, I like the idea that really she's jumping on. Now, is she jumping on because they're going to team up, or is she jumping on to dismantle the thing, which is what we mentioned, and kind of take that down? We also mentioned on that show that we for the longest time wanted to see Luke Skywalker pull down a Star Destroyer with his, power. And that's stemming from the Dark Horse comics that came out like in the early 90s. We got to see him take down an AT-AT or AT-AT, whatever. You guys can argue about that later. But we really always
Imperial
wanted
Walker, sir.
Thank you. It's a safe word. We've always wanted to see that, and we never got it. So it would be cool to just see Rey show us a level of power that we've not really ever seen on screen before in that manner. So I do like that theory, though, that maybe she is going to team up there.
And I think one interesting aspect of that is that we don't see Kylo's face, and it's pivotal. If he's wearing the mask, and you go down a completely different path than if he's not wearing the mask, right? Because I think that's going to be the metaphor for if there is a turn, if there's let's call it a redemption arc for lack of a better word. I think that's going to be pivotal. When the mask comes off, Ben is there, not Kylo Ren. So I think that's going to be a moment that we'll have laid out to us eventually. Yeah. Right.
And I feel like all of this, what I've been seeing here, after writing Skywalker, is redemption of Ben Solo. Besides maybe Mark Hamill, one Jesus Christ.
Right.
Jesus Christ Superstar at that, yeah.
Superstar, yes. What are your thoughts on that? Actually, episode 9 is about Kylo. Is about Ben Skywalker.
So spoiler alert, we didn't mention that, but you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an opportunity that they could explore. I think there's so many different angles they can go with this thing, because does Skywalker mean a singular Skywalker, right, or is it the family line in totality? And I think it's still a mystery, obviously, but I think Ben, there's a lot of opinions about whether or not Ben should be redeemed at this point, especially for what he did to Han. I can see some head shaking of nose up front here.
Oh, wait, so let's do this, because if you
I like her. Yeah.
Die.
Yeah, hot shot first. We did a show with, and Becca's back there. We did a show with Tarkins here a couple days ago here at Celebration, and we posed this question in there about whether or not you feel like Kylo is redeemable or should be redeemable. So just by a show of hands, how many of you would like to see him redeemed? How many of you would not like to see him be redeemed? It's about half.
It's kind of halfish.
It's about half. And I'm not going to take a stance. No, I'm kidding.
Sure. Cop out.
No, I think I wouldn't. I don't know. I don't mind either way. I think I'm going to stay to what I always say. And as long as you deliver a good story and I can get behind it, I'll be okay one way or the other. But we did talk about that, right? As far as to take it back to your question about, what does that all mean? It's either a single person. Maybe it's Rey. Maybe he goes back and revisits that. Maybe JJ couldn't let go of the fact that she has a last name. It could be that. It could be just the Skywalker name itself, or it could be Ben Solo. Kylo is not above. This is Star Wars. He's not above being redeemed. I don't know that I would personally like to see him be redeemed, but I think if they did it, I think it still plays in with, I'm going to finish what you started, right? He's echoing what his grandfather did and all the way to the very end.
We need to see the conflict, right? I think that's the part that in order to get there, we have to see the conflict. We got shades of it with Vader, right? The dialogue that they had on Endor when Luke turned himself in. We saw shades of it throughout all of that, and even in Empire. We haven't had enough of it to really get on board with Ben being redeemable at this point. So they have some work to do in order to get there, I think. If they're able to establish that and give us those opportunities, whether they're with Force visions or with their deeds or actions, the trailer clearly shows that Kylo is still very much aligned with the First Order, right? Whoever he's killing. And the kind of the red force, right? But they've got to show us more in order to get there. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to get on board with any of it. So, and to Albert's point, if they can do that and they can establish that, then maybe we can all get there with them.
Yeah.
She's still saying no. Jeremy.
I know that we're going to get Lucas Christos for fucking Rey. What do you think about this comment in the Jedi about always being with Ben? Are we going to get any scenes between Black and Ben?
Yeah.
I hope so.
I hope so.
He needs to troll him hard.
Just troll him all day long.
Repeat the question real quick.
Whether or not we're going to see Luke inside Kylo's head and trolling him, that kind of thing.
Right.
We got 5 minutes, so I'm going to make probably it's the last thing we'll talk about. So one of the things I threw out there, and it's not the most original idea, but I do like the idea that this mask is being reconstructed because he's trying to figure out a way to get this guy out of his head. And so by reconstructing the mask and fusing it with some kind of red force, something, whatever that is that we see finally in the trailer, that is a way that when he has that mask on, he's able to shut out Luke or shut out the connection with Rey. We don't know that if those two are intertwined forever and he's trying to sever that, trying to figure a way to get away from all that. Although someone made the comment he was trying to kind of
I think
bring
Mike,
them together.
Yeah, Mike and I were talking. Well, we were looking at it more as symbolic too.
Yeah,
of a way of blocking everybody out just in general, and not you don't show them your face, you don't show them whom you really are. And so maybe that's the way that we continue to get the struggle. I mean, if when he's not wearing it, do we see a different character? You have one more. So we do have one more. Sure. That would be pretty amazing, yeah. Yeah, so the comment was, can we get both Palpatine and Luke, and maybe even Anakin or someone like that? And
right.
It's the war inside my head.
The voices inside my head.
Right.
Yeah,
get one on each.
Right, yeah, I can see that happening.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I mean, because that was one of the things we talked about. Is Palpatine real, or is his corporeal form, or is it just or are they just fooling us with the trailer altogether, just for fun? But I think I hope so. I hope we see that, because I think not only do we love Ian McDiarmid dearly, but anything that he's in is just simply amazing. So any more opportunities we get, but he's got I think in order to wrap the story up, and if you want to really bridge the saga, the more you work those characters in, and the more you can give us little tidbits to fill that story in and to really complete it. What I don't want is for them to go ahead and say, here is all the answers to everything you want. We don't want to, go down all the things we were concerned about with Solo, right? Of do we need to explain every little thing? And Solo did a fairly good job of not doing it in your face, but is there a way that they can do that with all the tidbits, including, Anakin's birth or the influence that Palpatine had on Anakin's, conception?
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got this guy's yelling at me because we've got 2 minutes left here. So that's going to do it for this show. Before we go, we always want to say thank you to all of you, first off and foremost, for being here, supporting us. I want to say thank you to Disney and ReedPop, the fellow podcasters that will be here on the stage this week with us, as well as Mr. Mark Newbold for his continued support and mentorship. I think he's out there right now. If you're not listening to the show and you'd like to find us and hear us, you can find us at eargluemedia.com/CantinaCast. We'd appreciate if you could leave us a good comment. We'd love to see those. We'd love to read those on the air when we can. And that's going to do it.
Yeah, we have an active Discord server as well. So if you'd like to interact with us in real time, a number of guys here and gals as well. So eargluemedia.com/Discord. And we've got lots of T-shirts and stickers. So if you didn't get something on the way in, please come and pay us a visit and introduce yourselves and get to know you guys a little bit better. So appreciate everyone coming out.
All right, Johnny, any last words of wisdom before we go?
Punch it.
Punch it. All right. That's not a word of wisdom, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.